Hello, everyone. This is Alicia Brasher here at New Earth Children. This is going to be the very first interview that I do on this channel, and I'm so excited to be sitting here with Mary Rodwell. For those of you who don't know her, she is the founder and principal of ACERN, which stands for Australian Close Encounters Resource Network. She is a counsellor, a hypnotherapist, a teacher, a researcher, and an author and an international speaker. And I came across Mary's work back in, well, really, it stems back to 2014 when I came across her name and looped back around and found her work in 2016 in the beginning of my very fast, rapid ascension. And Mary Rodwell has been such a guiding light in her research and the work that she does for star children, and just paved the way to be a real advocate for star seeds. And so Mary, welcome. Thank you for being here. So delighted to have you here. So I guess, I mean, I hope that the viewers do know of you or have heard of you, but can you maybe just share a little bit about how you got into doing this work and research and publishing such amazing books?
I think Alicia, thank you again for inviting me. I want to explain to people that are still finding all of this extremely challenging in terms of reality. My own challenge was coming from 40 years ago as a nurse and a midwife. If you'd said to me, Mary, 40 years later, you're going to be traveling the world talking about aliens, I'd have probably sent you to the nearest psychiatrist. So that will explain perhaps my own shift in embracing multidimensionality and working with all of those individuals on this planet now that are being activated and awakening to their star heritage. For me, it was very much a process, and for some people it can happen very fast, but for others it can be a process. But having said all of that, I got into this from going from nursing and counselling in a medical practice, everything from I worked with grief and bereavement, hospice, all this kind of what I call more of the 3D experiences, slowly getting drawn into looking at this from a bigger perspective, which is the soul journey, and getting involved through doing hypnosis, working with people in past lives. That in itself takes you into the multidimensional, because it's honoring the fact that the soul is experiencing many forms in many lives in different places, not just Earth, but other planets, etc., etc. So that opened me up to more of this. But the crucial part of it was meeting finally individuals that were telling me they were having experiences. And my very first client, Ellis Taylor, lives in England now. He's an author himself. But he came to me saying, people just think you're crazy. There's no support groups. I've heard you're open-minded. Can you help? Waking up with marks on his body, shaved areas. He's got his partner having experiences, the children having experiences. And when you've got a whole family that are experiencing this, then it's pretty clear it's not someone's hallucination. It's not somebody's fantasy, not when a whole family have it. And not only that, because I'm one of these people that if it's weird and wonderful, I've got a book on it, because that's the nature of me. I had just in recent, you know how synchronicity, you get what you need when you need it. I'd read a couple of books on this. One was Whitney Strieber's book, Communion, which is a classic. And also Dr. John Mack, the professor of psychiatry, wrote the book Abduction-contact, Human Encounters with Aliens, who'd done all the psychological testing and said, I believe this is a real experience. So I got that both sides that satisfied my need to understand, but it was actually meeting people coming to me. And Ellis was the first. 2 weeks later, another person turned up with experiences, social worker having experiences. It was like the floodgates were opened once I'd been exposed to it. And I realized that this wasn't rare, that this in fact was far more common than I had ever imagined. It was. And as we say, 25 years later, 3,500 families and children down the track, and and realizing that that's only the ones that come for help. Goodness knows,
right,
the numbers out there that don't realize what it is they're experiencing, or just think they're crazy and there's nobody like them. They're, at the times I hear that, there's nobody, I don't know anyone who's like me, and I'm thinking, do you want me to tell you how many people are exactly like you? I remember distinctly a phone call from a 60-year-old gentleman, who had a local guy, and he was saying to me, I'm having all these strange experiences. I've been having them all my life. And so I said, look, I'll send you my questionnaire, which is my questionnaire where I compile a lot of the patterns of experience of starseeds. And I sent it to him. And within 24 hours, he phoned me back and he said this. He said, how do you know about my life? And I remember he was in tears because he honestly believed he was the only one having these experiences. And I said, well, I've got news for you. This is a child of hundreds of people that have had these types of experiences. Not all of them, in the sense, not every incident is the same for everyone else. It depends on how they also perceive certain things. But on the whole, this is the patterns of this experience, and it's global, and it's global consciousness that is being targeted, if you like, by these many, many intelligences. We saw star beings, the visitors, whatever name you want to give our ancestral star family. I mean, there's so many. But to me, the most important thing, and why I do what I'm doing, is because when people are frightened, they don't know what's going on, they're fearful whether they're okay, am I okay, or am I going, all these things with a bit of information can completely change that perception. And that is why what you're doing, Alicia, and why I do these interviews, is to help people understand you're not crazy, this is real, and we are all being prepared to be far more of our multidimensional selves than ever before, because it's time.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And I just want to go back to, there's so many different points that's coming to me as you're saying all that. I'm a massive advocate, and I always have been, for normalizing, because I do see people too, and I hear the same things that you said. It's like, I feel so alone, I feel so isolated. This is, but I guess I want to kind of move down a different pathway too, because I know that a big portion of your work is around the star children and the children that are coming in, and the parenting, and how, what have you seen with, a lot of these new children that have been coming through and still coming through. In my perception, I see them becoming, almost every year they come in a little bit more wired, into, evolution, or the new human, as the title of your book. How do you, work with parents of these children? Can you shed a bit of light on that, and how that is for them?
Well, this was something I didn't expect. Mostly I was dealing with adults at the time, but what I started to realize, that this was often intergenerational. So if someone was having an experience, for example, not only their siblings might be having one, but either mum or dad, granddad or grandma, or both. And often you'd get, oh yeah, granddad was always into UFOs or something. there is your line of the genetics. But what was happening too was, so many of them were saying, my child is having these experiences, talking about being taken, going on spacecraft with their little special friend or whatever, and talking about what happens there. And I realized that this was really a very much a parental concern, is how do I support my child who's having these experiences, and often very fearful for them, as well. That was part of it. But for me, more than anything, it was like, okay, it's a different scenario when you've got small children having these experiences. But what I also was interested in was the fact that many of the children of experiencers, were coming out with what, in today's, if it's metaphysical, they'll call them crystal children, indigo children, children of light, or whatever, their frequency, their energy. But in modern, in psychology, in our model of psychology, they're diagnosed as dysfunctional in some way with ADHD, Asperger's, dyslexia, maybe even bipolar might be part of this as well. I haven't brought that in so much, but what I was wondering is, okay, so if you are upgrading each generation, what is going on here? Because they're appearing to be dysfunctional. And the bottom line was, there were various clues to tell me what was going on here. One of them was a 9-year-old saying, Mary, when you go to school, they program you out of your light, was the way that she put it.
Oh, that put chills through me.
And then the teacher just presses the keys, is what she said. So this is the child explaining what happens when you go to regular school, that you get programmed out of your awareness because you're programmed into a 3D paradigm that says anything that isn't physical, like your 5 senses, is not okay. There's something wrong with you if you start to see energy fields, balls of light, beings or whatever. You can't do that because that's crazy stuff, isn't it? So what I came to understand is these children are wired differently, wired not to be programmed so easily. And one of the wonderful books was written by Neil Gold in Hong Kong when he realized he was ADHD in his 50s. And he wrote the book Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he retranslated it into always dialed into higher dimensions, because they are. And so what I was seeing with these children is they were far more in touch with their multidimensional selves than the older generations were, a lot more comfortable with it. Talking about going to other dimensions, when you've got children talking to you about portals around their home and that they want to go to another dimension, they just need to know the mathematical number of the planet and they can go through that frequency to that planet, for example. Now, this is a 7-year-old talking about this. This is mind-blowing when you have and I think he was 10 or 11, and his mum said that he talked about coming from a planet where he was a blue being. He came in as a center seed to connect to the planet because he was going to help with the pollution on this planet, for example. So you've got this amazing awareness. And why I wrote The New Human was because I wanted to show that the information from children was not coming from hypnosis or any altered state. This is conscious recall of who and what they are. And, that, particularly in the environment that we live in, is, people can be a bit suspicious of hypnosis or trance. But when you've got children with conscious recall, when you get an 8-year-old, I remember this 8-year-old from the US, asked her mum to contact me because her mum had been sharing her story, saying, I want to talk to Mary. And she said 2 nights before, they'd taken her on a starship, which they were showing her how to pilot the starship, to a planet where she was being taught to levitate, use her third eye, and was also shown genetic engineering of different species, because they were telling her that they were doing this to seed other planets. So she was being shown the program, all of 8. This was her, her recall. And this is what I mean. And so when parents get in touch with me, they say, look, I haven't prepared her to talk about this. I never talk about my experiences. Most parents are very cognizant that they don't, put this information out to the children. It's the children that are if you like, stunning the parents with what they know, how they understand it. And then the parents saying, you know, what do I do? How do I support my child who's having all those experiences? And that is what I get from some educators that see these kids and know who they are. You know, we've got some psychologists that are really aware of the star kids, and also the parents. I mean, I'll tell you another little wonderful story, a little anecdote of a child that I was dealing with a number of families, 5 families, doing a course with the families and the children in the US. And the younger children weren't so keen to share. Often it was the parents that needed the support, saying, how can we help them? What's the best environment? But this little 7-year-old on his own was sharing with me that he was being visited by Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, saying it was a teenage Sasquatch with his sister, and that the granddad was all white. He said, do you want me to speak dolphin? Would you like to hear it? So I'm going, yes, if you like. And so he speaks his dolphin with all the clicks and all the rest of it. And he says, you know, he says, I can tell when people are telling me the truth and when they're lying to me. So I said to him, so what do you feel when that happens? And he said, well, when they're lying, I go all cold. And when they're telling the truth, I feel all warm. So that was his experience of looking at truth and resonating to truth and what have you. I mean, it's fascinating when you get others that are saying they communicate with the animals. And one 8-year-old locally said to me that he communicates with animals. He said that his job was to help people understand that they need respect and we need to treat them with respect. He explained that his ancestors were the mantis beings, that his ancestors were the mantis, and when he dies, he's going back to being the mantis with his ancestors. So not a humanoid form at all. He also explained to me that when he's on the craft sometimes, that he evaporates into a mantis form for a time, and then comes back into his human form to come back down to this planet. So his soul will connect to another life form, which he inhabits. So we've got soul consciousness literally leaving one form and coming back to another form as part of his experience. And I remember him saying that he would be educated on the craft with other children from school. But he said some of the children were not human. And I said, how do you know? And he said, well, their eyes were different. He knew that they weren't human. And he said, we're taught to use our mind and create things with our mind. We're taught very complex things. And I said, so can you tell me some of the complex things? And he said, oh no, he said, they're too complex for you. So I got put in my place pretty well, you know. He's 8.
I just love hearing these stories. Nothing lights me up more. But and it's so good to hear this spoken and these stories, because it's triggering a lot of memories for me. That the whole Bigfoot thing was part of my childhood too. And you know, you don't think about it till you hear a story and think, oh yeah, that sort of, you know, connects in. And you know, all the stories sort of interconnect. And I think that's a good part about sharing, because it not only does it normalize it, but it can trigger memories. 2 other questions that are sort of coming to mind. I know that I've heard you speak about, because obviously in your regression work, people come to you for support, and there's a lot that can be uncovered through regression work and hypnosis. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how our human filters can perceive things from fear or from a negative standpoint, and then obviously going into having a session with hypnosis and how the subconscious can sort of access more from maybe a more evolved state or a high consciousness state.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about hypnosis, that, you know, people are going to be out of control, that it's going to be really scary, because they're going to see more of what happened, whether it's missing time, which is a common one, where they'll say, look, I was on a journey and it took twice as long as it should have done. I know something happened because I found myself with marks or whatever. So, and the fear is often, well, what did they do? What did they do to me? All this kind of, understandably so, if you don't understand what's going on. So a lot of the time, the exploration is about, okay, so what actually happened, rather than what you fear may have happened, which is completely different, because many fear all sorts of terrible things. And often as not, that may not have been anything like what the reality is. So when I take somebody into finding out what happened maybe on a spacecraft, they may even see themselves having some procedure done. And what you can do is get them to ask questions about that procedure. So it isn't just, oh, I'm seeing all this happening to me. Okay, so I want you to look at the beings and see any that may be familiar. And there's always one that's very familiar, because they've been picked up more than they realized. So there's always one that they'll say, well, that one's familiar. And I think, yeah, I know why. And then I'll say, ask that being how many times they've picked you up, just to get them used to the communication. And they may say, oh, when I was 2, when I was 5, when I was, and they'll reel it off. And they don't know how they know that, but it just comes in. And then I'll say, ask why you've been picked up this time. And they will often say they're monitoring my health. They may do some healing procedures. This is what's happening this time. So I'm saying, so how does that feel to you? Oh, well, that feels okay. One of the questions many say is, what about consent? So one of the questions that I always ask when they're in that superconscious state is, have you on any level consented to this experience? And most of them will say, yes, before I came here. So as a soul. So that clears that up. It's really interesting, because when they're in that space of being able to communicate, they can ask all sorts of questions about their experiences. Why did this happen? Why did I have those marks or whatever? So all these questions that they've wondered about can actually be clarified by this procedure of being able to communicate at that point, and what have you. And for people that don't realize, the survey that we did with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, with 4,000
I was part of that.
Well, 50% of those recall that their experience, 50% of them had a healing experience on board craft. So this is huge, that half that number had healing experiences on board craft. And this is not known generally. I mean, generally there's all this fear and trauma and what have you. And that's only because a lot of the time people haven't yet fully understood what was going on. And the great thing with hypnosis is that you can take them to that space and you can get them to access those answers. And, that to me has been the greatest benefit of hypnosis. It's not, oh, they're doing all these terrible things to me. Once you can find out why you're having a relationship with these beings, and others will discover that part of their DNA may be connected to these intelligences. You may have cooperation of the mantis, the grey, a humanoid, or what, all working together for this, one of these big agendas, which is part of this activation of humanity now, an activation of consciousness. So, it's amazing what you can discover and completely turn someone 180 degrees from absolute fear to a complete place of calm and acceptance. And it may only take one session to do that. This isn't multiple sessions. You don't need to do that. Sometimes once is enough, just so that they realize what's actually going on, because it's the unknown that's scary rather than the known.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And I hope that inspires perhaps someone watching this, that if they have had experiences to go have a session, to connect with you, because I think a lot of it is what the mind creates of the unknown. And sometimes people can be living in fear for a long time, and just having the answers and the greater depth of understanding can change your whole life. I mean, I guess that's why you wrote the first book that you did, you know, Awakening. So I just kind of want to bring that in. I'm just gonna, so you've written 2 books to date, is that correct? Yeah. So Awakening, and I love the title of How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life. I mean, that just sums up everything that you just, you know, encompassed right there. But of course, the new human, so awakening to our cosmic heritage. So I will put the link in the description box below, because I highly recommend that perhaps if you are an experiencer and this is a new coming into awareness that you're going through, and I'll throw a question in a second, but to get those books and read through them, you know, and to go have a session and seek support, because it really can transform your life in magical ways. But I guess the question that I had for you was, do you find that after people have a session that they can have more, it creates more of a bond or a connection to those beings, that they can kind of go away and have more conscious contact, if you will? Is that something that you see? Maybe not for everyone, but
absolutely, Alicia. What the beings are waiting for is for you to transcend your fear, so that they can access you without putting you and making you paralyzed and taking you in trance. The more you're accepting of what's going on, the contact will change, and it will change in a way where you feel more connected and equal to what's going on, rather than you're being this victim that's being taken. I liken the UFO encounter experience to a modern shamanic wake-up call, because the shaman has to transcend their human fears to operate multidimensionally. And really, this whole encounter thing is transcending your human fears to realizing you're part of this amazing connection to these intelligences. And once you understand that, and one of the reasons that Awakening was important was I was showing a process that people went through, which is, you know, that was, you know, the resource book was because so many people don't know where to go, who to talk to. They're afraid to go to a psychologist or psychiatrist in case they end up medicated or the rest of it. And what I was saying was, the more you understand about what's going on, the more you're open to what's going on, your contact will change.
yeah.
Because it's well, they're too scared yet. We can't do anything yet because they're too scared. We're going to have to put them into an altered state to move them to where we're going. And what people also need to realize is, what the surveys also showed something very important, is only 25% of these encounters are physical. 75% are out of body. So that makes it even harder to quantify it in 3D, because often it's not, it's your consciousness that's going, your soul, your spirit is actually going, not the physical body. And that's why in ufology, so many struggled with people with experiences in the nuts and bolts of ufology, because it was only a small part of the interactions was physical. Most of it was consciousness. You're going out of body, they're taking you out of body, you know. And that's what is not understood.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up. Do you think that that has changed? Because I know that, you know, going back in the 80s and the 90s, there was a lot of sort of grey abductions, for lack of a better word, that were probably a lot of physical. Do you think that that's changed over the years in terms of like consciousness changing on the planet? Or, you know, do you think that certain programs have ended just based off what you've seen? Is it now becoming more consciousness based, whereas it was more physical? Do you think that there's been a trend or a shift in that?
It's hard to say, because I still get those that have the whole classic kind of what they would call an abduction encounter experience. There are still those that have that. But what I am seeing is, with the newer generations,
Okay.
Very few of them are having that because they're being born awake.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they talk about their special friends that take them at night on trips to starships and other planets and teach them things in the space school. So that is very much more conscious with these new generations. But prior to that, there was a lot of fear around it. And again, I think as the generations have evolved, so have we evolved into more understanding of what's going on. It's almost to a little bit like things, we call it being psychic, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentient has been, the weirdos, that and whatever. Whereas now people are a lot more accepting of intuitive abilities and what have you. There's not, oh, you're a weirdo now. Oh, tell me, are you picking up anything? There's a lot more sort of acceptance of that, and that's because I think we are changing in terms of exploring consciousness. Yeah. With all these studies to do with near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, shamanic experiences. People are exploring consciousness now. Even those in the more conventional fields of science are looking at consciousness and realizing more and more that we're not just our physical container, that, and our physical senses. We are actually a consciousness within that physical framework. And that is becoming more and more accepted, I believe, by those that are ready to. And it's all about, are you ready?
Yeah. I mean, you can see that the collective has gone leaps and bounds, in the last 5-10 years. It's been a big leap. And I think that that's due to the fact of people like yourself and Dolores Cannon, who really paved the way to do the research. And I think with your work, I think that it reaches people that maybe, like as I said in the beginning, you're such an advocate. And I think because you came from, a medical background and you came from that world, and then you stepped in and you kind of blend those two together. And I think it's really a credit to the work that you've done to pave that way for consciousness. And it's magnificent to see how more accepted it is as to say, 10 years ago. But if we're going back and then moving forward, I mean, how do you see, or do some of these children talk to you about what, where we're heading as a collective, as the planet, but maybe more specifically around, education systems and parenting, that's sort of the niche that I'm sort of exploring down. But do they talk about that? I mean, obviously you mentioned about that child that talks about the programming in the current system. I mean, no doubt that's likely to change, but do you have any insight into the changing in the structure of the education system to support, these children coming through?
Well, one of the things that I made a point of discussing in my book was about how do we educate these new generations of children that are wired differently. Yeah. And first, we have to understand how they experience reality. So honoring of their awareness for those that are hugely empathic, that feel emotion and have come in as healers, for example, and this kind of thing. Others that have come in to challenge the system, a lot of the Indigos have come in to do that because of the inaccurate perspective we have of what reality is, for example. So it is ultimately about exploring new systems to support this, rather than trying to fit someone who's round in a square hole, for example, for simplicity's sake. And this is why, when I've talked to certain educators, we know we need to look at a system where we're giving the children the opportunity to tell us what they need to be all that they have come here to be. But as parents or support, we need to look at making sure that not only do we listen to them and how they experience their experiences, but make sure they're eating sensibly, that, they have good food, And Dr. Lena Olson, a molecular biologist who I quote quite a bit because she was part ADHD, part Asperger's, talked about her own experiences where even her physical senses were expanded, such as touch and hearing and sight. They're all expanded in these children. So they're, you know, a lot more sensitive. And she said they need supporting with the right kind of vitamins. They need more vitamin Bs for the ADHD to help them stabilize. So we have to look at looking at the physical vehicle and making sure that they have what they need so that, you know, if they can eat organic, so we have all the preservatives, all the, you know, all these kinds of things that are disturbing them as much as possible. Homeschooling if possible, if not, look at alternatives like Steiner or whatever. At least they're an option, for example. But the bottom line is that the awake educators, and there are a lot around the planet, are wanting to do something because they are star seeds themselves. It's getting the right the funding and getting the opportunity to create the environment which will support these children. But I believe that that will happen. I'm not quite sure how it will all happen, but I believe it will. But my main option was, when writing, was it's all very well isolating that they're seeing and experiencing all of this, but what can we do to support them until they reach a point where they can support themselves? And that's about listening to them, honoring their experiences, and doing our best to make sure that they're healthy, you know, physically healthy, so that they can manage their multidimensional selves as well. And for parents to listen to their resonance to what's going on, and to trust that they're being guided to look after this star, this beautiful new soul that needs them and what have you, to be cognizant of their part in that is listening to their intuition, their knowing, their sensing, their feeling, because that will guide them to be there for the child. I mean, although there are many challenges, a young woman contacted me about her daughter, who she said was telepathic from birth and is now 3 years old. And she explained that she tuned into everybody and it was all very well. And for a while it was interesting. She said, but she's now 3 and she's still doing it. And the mother said, it's really hard to monitor your thoughts all the time because your child is picking up on them. So there's the challenge, parents. What are you thinking? Because they will pick this up, you know, and this is the challenge. We really are going to have to walk our talk, because these children can look at you and they know. They'll look at you when you're not being in your you know, having that integrity that you need. And this is really another indicator why we have to do our bit as we are ascending as well. It's really important that we honor our truth and we walk our talk.
I was just, you took the thoughts right out of my head, because I was like, do you see that in the sense that these children are the catalyst for the ascension of the parents? Oh,
absolutely. Because if you think about it, if, as this 7-year-old explained, he knows when you're speaking the truth and when you're not speaking the truth. So, you know, you have got to watch your thoughts. And the thing is that these children, many of them are telepathic. A lot of them will not always choose to be verbal very early. So that's an indicator, because they already know what's going on. So why should they bother? And I remember one young man telling me that his sister, they were telepathic together until he was about, you know, she was about 5 or 6, and then told him to stop being lazy and start talking. So
I just love that. I love hearing these stories, which kind of brings me to another question. Do you see, what sort of early development do you see in some of these star children? You know, are they, I mean, you just mentioned that some are non-verbal because they're using telepathy, but on the flip side of that, are you seeing that some are talking, you know, earlier? Are they walking earlier? They're reading, writing, all those sorts of things?
Some of them certainly are very advanced in terms of all of those things, but others, depending on the role they're going to play, may be the opposite. They may be quite slow in a lot of the cognitive side, the left brain side of things, because they're working more multidimensionally on this side. You know, the healers and the empaths may not relate to this whole system of, you know, reading and writing and whatever for a long while, because it doesn't make any sense to them in the sense of what they're experiencing. So you can get those that are really advanced with left brain cognitive functioning, and you'll get others that appear to be quite slow, and maybe some of them struggle to retain information. And part of that is because the information they get on this planet isn't accurate. So they're getting an education somewhere else, and what they're told here isn't accurate. So they actually don't take it on. They struggle to take on information that's inaccurate. I remember a 12-year-old describing to me that when she's in the class, oh yeah, this 12-year-old said to me, when the teacher's talking to me, she said, some of the information isn't correct because I've got a little being that stands there with me and tells me not to listen to that because it's actually not accurate. So she, you know, she's got her little friend telling her, don't listen to that. It's a waste of time. You know, no, it's not that. You know, don't bother with that. And they will challenge the educators. And I've met a number of older star seeds that they got into trouble by questioning the teacher and saying to the teacher, but that's not right. That's not, you're wrong. And the teacher getting really angry because this 8-year-old or 7-year-old is questioning what they're speaking about, but because they know that it's inaccurate. So you'll get often children getting sent out of school because they're questioning the information because they know that it's not accurate. So, you know, this is sometimes been the issue. I've had some parents say, my child is forever getting into trouble because they were arguing with the teachers.
Oh, bless them. Nothing makes me happier when I hear stuff like that. So obviously we're talking about, you know, the conventional education system and how it is and how it, you know, it is changing and it will evolve. But I want to talk about night school, you know, on craft. How common is that amongst some of the kids that you've worked with or families that are being educated at night on craft?
It's actually very common. And I've got a quote from a 3-year-old describing where his mum was getting him up for school or play school or nursery school. And he said, but I've already been to school. I was at school last night because they came through the window and explained he'd been off somewhere to school, and he certainly didn't want to go to any more school that morning. But, you know, this is a 3-year-old explaining. But when, you know, this seems to be going on from a very young age, and it's very complex. Some of the things they're taught, origin of the species, cosmology. One young 8-year-old was being shown a black hole and also shown different realities as well, and a wormhole, explaining that everything was in real time, where she was seeing dinosaurs and they were showing various qualities of realities. It can be how to use energy. It can be how to levitate and use their abilities, as this young man was saying. There's a whole range of multidimensional skills that they are educated into, including, as I say, the origin of the species and things like that. Sorry, I need to shut the window.
Sure, no worries.
Someone's just started up. That's better. Someone just started up one of their garden implements. So I just didn't want it to get in the way. So I list some of the things that they're taught, and in complex mathematics, complex physics, the true nature of reality. When I was talking once, I was talking to the father in the US with his 9-year-old son comes in and says, can I speak to Mary? And I said, sure. I said, you know, why do you want to speak to me? Well, he said, it's because of your frequency. And then he explained that his other life was on Orion. He was a light physicist working with time travel technology, and he found the scientists here were very limited, and the nearest was Nikola Tesla. So you've got this kind of awareness in some of these children, and this is what I mean is the indicators are when they're talking about special friends coming at night, taking them through the window or whatever, being taught on craft. They may be shown how to communicate with different types of beings, including some connect to crystals, as well as plants. And I've got this lovely video of a 6-year-old explaining that he was holding a meteorite, and he's explaining what the meteorite is telling him about where it came from and what it felt. And the mother said, but how is it talking to you? And he said, oh, it's talking to me in my mind. You know, a 6-year-old. And this is my point. These are not things they see in cartoons. These are not things that you would get in, you know, what they're, you know, the programs, if they watch television, even if they watch or not. It's information that can be really, really complex. And they will go into detail when you ask them about it. They'll actually go into detail and explain more of what it is they're talking about. And that to me is very, very compelling. So, you know, a good 8 chapters really are on the children and their understanding. Then I've got the teenagers that know they've come in and are connected to various star systems and remembering their past lives. So it continues as long as they're not shut down. And that's the big one, because many do shut down when they get laughed at school or whatever, and it can be really tough.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important point, really, you know, whether it's a loved one, a child, you know, it's about, I guess, meeting it with curiosity and open-heartedness and being able to listen and learn, even if it doesn't fit with your own belief systems, and use that opportunity to reevaluate, you know, what you thought was, you know, reality. It's a beautiful revolution of beings that are coming in here to assist and support humanity in this transition that we're going through.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I just want to finish off because I'm kind of curious, like, have you had your own regressions, and do you I mean, how has this work changed your life personally? Obviously it's a big transition that you've been, but do you grasp the bigger picture for yourself, and is there a change that will come in your work, or is it still continuing the work that you're doing?
Good question. I think that certainly I have felt that obviously without me being aware of it at the time, that I've been given a process to become more and more accepting of the greater reality, from, you know, being brought up in a conventional religion, questioning, and being very involved in that religion for a while, but questioning and then realizing it didn't fit when certain things like reincarnation came up, which was not acceptable in the religion, but I was meeting or reading about people having experiences in past lives. So I started to question more and more about that. I ended up having my first past life regression, where I had 3 different lives, and one of them was as a Roman soldier who got very bored as a farmer and was being recruited to the Roman army and ended up in England. And what was interesting was I was using terms that I was not familiar with while in that space, which was very compelling, because I thought, well, why would I say that? And, you know, it was certain words that I found later were absolutely accurate for what happened with the Roman army. Wow. One of them was fighting the Gauls And I said, we're fighting the ghouls. And the guy doing the regression said, what does it feel like as you're fighting? I said, you don't feel, you just kill. And I remember my other part saying, hold on a minute, that's not very nice. Because I wouldn't say that, you know, it was weird. And I said, we're going to deal with the barbarians in England, and the barbarians were the Scots. And I called them barbarians. You know, it was like, hold on a minute, why did I say that? So it was more and more I realized that I was tapping into something, and I learned hypnosis so I could help with others that have had phobias, all sorts of different reasons why they wanted to explore past lives. So that opened me up some more. But I also did a 3-year apprenticeship, if you like, working on opening up multidimensionally, connecting to what I call my non-human team, doing energy work, all of that kind of thing was part of the program for 3 years. What that did was show me without question the reality of that, how we operate from a consciousness perspective, because I had too many, well, you call them synchronicities, coincidences, call it what you like. And I was hard, to convince, believe me, because I've got a very healthy left brain that says, hold on a minute, don't get carried away, So I do give my team a hard time, because I will say, all right, you give me this information, now prove it. Because I'm a bit of a tinker about things like that. But it's been important to me that I get information that's useful, that I can verify, that helps me. So it has been invaluable, because in the book Awakening, I talk about what's clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, all of those. I know what they feel like because I've experienced them. So it isn't just me looking in a book and saying, oh, well, it's this, and this. I've experienced it. So when people come to me and I question them about their experiences, and I'll say, well, have you seen this? How do you experience this? Whatever. I can then often give them, if you like, tools to manage it in a way they're not afraid of it. They're not, because some people are scared when this happens because they think they're going to go crazy. They think, oh, maybe demons are going to get them, or all this kind of stuff. I can actually help them through a process that will enable them to bring it into 3D and have confidence in it and not be afraid of it. Because that's the next step, Alicia, is we're going to be working telepathically. So the less we're afraid of our multidimensional selves, and the more we're used to working with it, the more then we are being prepared for that next level of connection to the cosmic family. So to me, that's the next step. You get away from fear, you start working with your awareness and understanding how it works. And then you're not fearful of it anymore, Yeah. You say, oh, okay, guys, I can, all right, whatever. And it's a peaceful transition then, rather than a fearful thing. It's exciting because you don't feel alone anymore.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I love that progression from, starting to tap into it to then, I always say it's experimental, exploratory. I have to get that word out. And that's really where the magic happens, isn't it? And then the fear starts to go away. And, to see people go through that phase, as I've gone through my journey, and you've just spoken of yours, it's invaluable. And, depending on, no matter where you are in your journey, I think it's always important to have support of someone who, like yourself, is, not only, has healthy skepticism, and I think that's important for discernment, but you've actually, walked your talk, and you've gone through that process yourself in experiencing what it's like. And I think that's a beautiful offering, a combination of offerings that you can offer people to take away tangible, practical tools to use in their everyday life, because it is about that integration. It's not just having a one-off experience, it really is living embodiment. So beautifully said. Wow, just thank you so much, Mary. This has been an absolute delight to sit here and talk to you. And as I mentioned before, if you feel a resonance with Mary, if you want to connect with her, I will put all the details of how you can do that and how you can purchase her books in the description box below. And just, once again, massive thank you for the work that you've done and the pioneering of, allowing starseeds to have a voice and for this to be normalized. It's absolutely invaluable for all of us. So thank you so much, Mary, and thank you everyone for watching. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.